Hello, the Pioneer viewers. How are you doing? I hope you're healthy and well. As the Pioneer team, we continue to bring you the Russian-Ukrainian war with a map. The echoes of the fall of Avdiivka are still continuing, right? After Avdiivka, we mentioned that the Russian army would probably try to trap the Ukrainian armed forces in Robotyne salient. After Avdiivka, we mentioned that the Russian army would probably try to trap the Ukrainian army forces in the Robotyne. According to reports, the claims that has been confirmed, Russian armed forces have intensified their offensives in the western part of Robotyne. Ukrainian troops are fighting back. There are also new developments regarding Avdiivka. So, what is the latest situation on the front line? Let's examine it together. As the Pioneer team, we continue to bring the Russia-Ukraine war to your screens. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so as not to miss our daily map reports and reports and the agenda. You can also support me and my team by using the super thanks button below the videos. Let's start if you are ready. The Pioneer reports. Let's start with the developments on the Zaporizhia front line. As we mentioned, the Russian armed forces have been shifted their center of operations to Robotyne. We are observing fierce fighting, especially in the outskirts west of Robotyne. We can say that the Ukrainian armed forces are currently in control of the situation, but this is of course only for the time being, because there is a situation that the Ukrainian sources often state, and that is the issue of support. As long as the Ukrainian armed forces are supported, the Russian army has no chance to advance here, but we know this firm here. When the support for the Ukrainian army was at its highest, Russian troops were unable to make any progress, at least on an infantry basis, because the Russian firepower is not as sufficient as it seems. So, if you talk about the Ukrainian armed forces protecting their forward lines, and the forward line in Robotyne is very critical, then the Ukrainian army needs to be resumed immediately. On the other hand, we also observe that the units of the Russian armed forces are attacking from the direction of Robotyne and Verbov. There is some progress in both areas. At the moment, however, we can't say that these advances give the Russian army a tactical advantage. Let's continue with the artillery activity in the area. According to the latest reports, artillery units of the Russian armed forces targeted Ukrainian armed forces positions in Lobkov, Avdiivka, Kornov, and Zhelezhnodozhnoye, and Malinkovka. In turn, Ukrainian armed forces units hit Russian positions in Kopany, Novoprokopovka, and Verbov. Let's continue with the latest developments in the Vuhledar sector of the Zaporizhia front line. According to reports, the Russian armed forces continue to insist on familiar positions. Following the shelling of the Russian armed forces units, we observed that are very launching attacks west of Zaporizhia. There are also reports that the Russian troops are trying to advance in the Perechitovska area. The Russian army may have transferred some of the troops from Avdiivka to this area, and it's not possible to confirm this at the moment, but we think that the situation here should be carefully monitored, because this is the region where the Russian army has not achieved any successes for months, and they may want to break the cycle. Let's also look at the artillery activity in the region. According to the latest reports, artillery units of the Russian armed forces targeted Ukrainian troops stations in Levadny, Novoandriivka, Rivnopol, Zolotniva, Vuhledar, and Viliadny. Ukrainian artillery, on the other hand, worked on the units of the Russian armed forces in Pryodny, Zaporizhia, and Novomyrsk. Let's continue with the developments on the Donetsk front line, which has been the main agenda item in recent days. According to reports, Russian forces, supported by long-range weapons on the Donetsk front line, carried out offensive operations in Novomykhailivka. But here we still observe that the Ukrainian defense has capacity to resist, and there is no confirmed evidence that the Russian army has made new gains. On the other hand, Russian offensive units tried to break through the Ukrainian defense near Pobeda, but there the Ukrainian army has already made a layered defense line, and the Russian army has not even broken through this first layer yet. Therefore, we think that the borderline in this area will remain stable for some time. Following the shelling, Russian troops are also carrying out attacks near Gorgoriivka and Lastochkina. However, the situation is a bit more critical for the Ukrainian army. In fact, there is a critical situation for both armies, because the Ukrainian army is short of ammunition, and there is a great fatigue in the Russian army. The Russian troops are extra tired because the struggle they have been fighting for months have not gone to expected peace. And just like the Robotyne, increased support for Ukrainian troops will turn the situation in favor of the Ukrainian army. Let's continue with the artillery activity in the region. According to the latest reports, artillery units of the Russian armed forces targeted positions of the Ukrainian armed forces in Konstantinivka, Paraskontiivka, and Krasnogorovka town, Nevelskoye, Orlovka, Stepnoy, Novobakhmutovka, which is under the control of the Ukrainian armed forces, and New York. In turn, artillery units of the Ukrainian armed forces targeted Russian positions in Mariinka and the village of Krasnogorovka. Let's continue by analyzing the latest developments on the Bakhmut front line. According to reports on the Bakhmut front line, the Russian armed forces have rotated their reserves. According to this rotation, the reserves of the Russian armed forces were deployed in the vicinity of Avdiivka and Klishchiivka. This confirms a majority reduction in the main offensive units of the Russian army has allocated to this region. According to reports, these reserves units are conducting offensive operations near Avdiivka and Klishchiivka. However, the advantage we have repeatedly mentioned here remains. Thanks to the advantage of the dominant hills, the Ukrainian defense forces were able to repel all these attacks. On the other hand, there is some activity on the northern flank of Bakhmut. According to reports, units of the Russian armed forces tried to advance towards Ivanyivsky from the Khoromov direction after the shelling. We can also speak of limited gains by the Russian army. Regional sources report that Russian assault forces have reached an outskirt of the village. The likely target of these Russian troops will be Kazov-Yar. Let's continue with the artillery activity in the region. According to the latest reports, artillery units of the Russian armed forces targeted Ukrainian armed forces units in Chasiv-Yar, Bogdanovka, Vasilyovka, Razdolvlaka, and Venhenkamskoye. On the other hand, artillery units of the Ukrainian armed forces worked on the units of the Russian armed forces stationed in Bakhmut, Khromovoy, and Yahidny. On the Luhansk front line, the Russian army's multi-prolonged offensive efforts continue. We see that they are particularly focused on Ternay region. However, Ukrainian resistance here is still very strong. According to reports, the last attacks of the Russian army were repelled by the Ukrainian defense, and it is even reported that some positions have been recaptured by the Ukrainian troops. So what do you think? Do you think the Ukrainian army will be able to dominate the front line again? What is needed to achieve this dominance? Can the Ukrainian troops launch a counteroffensive again? Do you think the Ukrainian army needs more support? Let me know in the comments, because you know that I read and I care about all your comments.